Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on AI is driving new skills in supply chain. I'm Marisa Brown, and I'm the Senior Principal Research Lead at APQC for Supply Chain Management. In addition to leading all of our research around supply chain, I also create content that goes in the resource library, on the APQC blog, and on other third-party sites. New and emerging technologies are really changing the way supply chains operate. And what we're seeing is that the importance of technology is continuing to increase. And this changes that are facing supply chain are just so compounded by all of the external disruptions that we have, whether it's the pandemic, supply shortages, or security threats. Among all of these technological developments, though, that are really impacting supply chain is artificial intelligence, or AI. And AI can make a big difference by helping with more accurate predictions and thus more informed decisions. AI is moving out of the realm of the theoretical and into the real world of the supply chain. And with that in mind, there are two main sections to what I want to share today. First, I want to take a look at how organizations are applying AI in supply chain. And then secondly, the impact that AI is having on employees in supply chain. And just a word about the insights that I'm sharing today. The APQC conducted research in 2020 with 1,000 participants across the globe to really deeply examine the use of AI across the supply chain. And why did we do this research? Why did we pick the topic? In my annual priorities survey of supply chain, I saw that practitioners and leaders ranked AI within the top 6 trends expected to impact significantly supply chains by 2023. So this research is really going to look at trends in AI and value drivers for its adoption, and importantly, the people side of this. We'll look at changes in supply chain employees, plus skills needed for AI and the impact of AI on employee learning. So let's start by looking at applying AI in supply chain. And AI has the potential to assist with all aspects of supply chain, from the ability to create self-adjusting supply chain plans, to enabling your warehouse operations, to self-optimizing processes. We'll start with a look here at the degree of adoption of AI overall. So the big picture. And this chart is in descending order of adoption. And what it shows is that the use of AI across the supply chain for many organizations is still in the early stages. Only about 38% of respondents are past the point of actually piloting the technology, and those are in the highest stages of operating and optimizing their AI. About a third of our participants are in the beginning stages of either piloting or still implementing the technology. So what we see is that 4 in 10 are still only considering or evaluating AI for its adoption across the supply chain. Those organizations are still on the fence and have not yet committed. So it's fair to wonder whether the overall data hides differences in adoption by the various parts of the supply chain, because the supply chain has so many different functions that have to work together. So we dug deeper in our research, and we found the same story. We found that regardless of function within supply chain, and here you can see on the slide, we asked about supply chain planning, procurement, manufacturing, and asset management. Most organizations are still in the early stages of adoption. We see approximately 1/4 of respondents in those later stages of operating or optimizing their AI across all 4 of these functions. So then you might say, let's take a look at the core of supply chain, what historically many people thought of when they thought of supply chain, and that is logistics and warehousing. So we thought maybe here's where we would see greater pickup of AI. And not really. The percentages are fairly similar, with again, only about 1/4 of respondents in those later stages. So I would say that regardless of what the headlines might imply, it's pretty fair to say that across the supply chain, AI is not yet widely adopted or optimized. But if we start to peel back the layers of this onion to see why AI is not so widespread in supply chain, we see that for 50% of our respondents, AI has only been in use in a business as usual environment for 1 to 2 years. Of course, with the pandemic, you might actually say, what is business as usual? But we'll talk about the day-to-day operation. More than a third of our respondents have had it in place for less than a year, and only 13% more than 2 years. So thanks to the pandemic and all the other disruptions on the supply chain, I think we will see this adoption grow dramatically in the coming years. When it comes to technology, there is the age-old question of build versus buy. Should we make this ourselves in-house and have it fit our needs perfectly, or look for something from a vendor off the shelf? And I will say that although cloud computing and other developments like software as a service have changed a lot of the context for this answer, people still want to know. And what we found in our research is there is really no consensus on the types of software being used for AI. But what we found was an appetite for customized software. The largest group of respondents, 33%, is using custom software developed specifically for their organization. The second largest group, about 30%, is using off-the-shelf software that was also customized for them. And over time, I would guess as the packages continue to improve and develop, that we would see that second number grow. We see that fewer than 1 in 5 are using off-the-shelf software without customization, and even fewer, only 17%, are actually building custom software in-house. And the caveat there, the warning is if you choose to go that route, you have to be sure that you have the resources, not just to build it, but to maintain it as well. So if we know what people are adopting, the question then is why? Why are organizations embracing AI? And we see that there's several reasons at the top of the list. Number one is the hope for revenue growth from a shorter sales cycle, reflecting the use of AI in sales and marketing, followed by customer satisfaction improvement and revenue growth from entering new markets or new customer growth. But it's the fourth driver, headcount reduction. That's the one that scares people more than the fifth one for sure, reducing the cost of acquiring customers. The fear of being automated out of a job is not a new fear. It's been around since technology was introduced into the workplace, but it is a persistent fear. It is one that you will see actually reflects the reality of what many organizations are trying to do with technology. And interestingly, headcount redeployment, so not just reduction, but redeployment is much further down the list in the 9th spot, reflecting the reality, especially in a tight labor market, that organizations are really focused on headcount. Now, I'm going to come back to this in a little while because the story is not as scary as it looks. Organizations were thinking that AI would let them reduce the headcount, but spoiler alert, that may not be what's happening. So then let's take a look at the top use cases for AI automation, how it's being used today, and then the next slide we'll look at it in 3 years, how people anticipate using it. For now, the number one use is connected IoT product design and development, IoT being Internet of Things. So we see AI is helping to build better products. Second is field service and training with augmented reality. And this is a great mix of people and technology. So a good example of this in play is Google Enterprise, formerly Google Glass. And what that lets organizations do is have heads-up training in the production or the warehouse location where the employees wear the glasses and see overlaid on reality in front of them the instructions that they need or the schematics that they have to review. And it really has helped to shorten the time to competency for those organizations using it. The third use case is automated detection and response with sensor-based monitoring, and then connected products with intelligent assistance. So that's today what organizations are using AI for. Now let's look into our crystal ball, and in the future, 3 years from now, the number one use case people anticipate is connected products with intelligent assistance. We're seeing more and more of that, as your refrigerator can tell you it's time to get milk when you run low, but also automated store operations and services and logistical workflow optimization. And then in fourth place, again, the field service and training with the augmented reality. So we aren't moving away from that connection to our people. Predictive equipment maintenance, active automated asset monitoring, content aggregation and extraction, and then customer insights and real-time response. So in 3 years, that's what organizations hope to be able to do with AI. And we asked people, especially those who've already adopted AI, what has been the impact of it on your supply chain? And one of the most common themes that we saw relates to time. How organizations are able to provide real-time data access and monitoring, reduce delivery timelines, improve time management practices, and more. AI is helping these organizations to free up time and do better analysis of their data, build stronger processes, work more closely with their suppliers, engage in better delivery, and better balance supply and demand. So as we've seen, organizations recognize the wide-ranging applicability of AI for supply chain use. But because of that, it also means that the impact on employees and their skills is also wide-ranging. So many organizations believe that AI drives value by reducing the number of employees needed for supply chain. And we saw just a few minutes ago that a reduction in headcount is a top driver for why organizations are deploying AI. As AI takes on more tasks that were previously completed by employees, organizations were thinking they might be able to reduce how many employees they need in supply chain or redirect their skills to other areas. So to start looking at the impact on employees, let's look at the dark blue bars, the percentage change in supply chain full-time equivalent employees. And a full-time equivalent is 40 hours a week. You might have 2 people working 20 hours a week that together equal 1 full-time equivalent, for example. So let's take a look. And over the prior 12 months, we see that organizations have not seen much churn in their supply chain employees. At the median, which is the 50th percentile right in the middle, the point where half of the organizations are above and half of the organizations are below, we see only 6% change in employees. Now, the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile are on this chart as well to kind of give you a sense of the range. And it really has not been extensive churn in the supply chain. Now let's look at the light blue and the purple bars. For every percentage of FTEs eliminated or redeployed due to AI, and you see that it's 25% at the median, and that's the purple bar, we see that our respondents reported an equal or greater increase in FTEs rather, added or hired due to AI. It's 28% at the median. So let me reiterate that. At the median, organizations are actually adding more FTEs as a result of AI than they are eliminating or redeploying them. And we don't see any significant difference at all at the 25th and 75th percentiles. So this might be counterintuitive for you if you were expecting that AI was going to eliminate jobs and eliminate people. And here's the key takeaway. Rather than replacing employees, AI is changing the skills that are needed by our supply chain professionals. It's not that people are being replaced by AI, it's that the skills they need are changing. So if that's the case, now let's take a look at what are those skills. APQC looked at the shift in skills needed by supply chain professionals, and as a result of adopting AI, we see that people need more social skills and deep work skills. And deep work is a term that was coined by Cal Newport for those skills that are really related to being able to focus intensely without distraction. So AI leaves the people on staff to engage in work involving insight and analysis. And technology is no substitute for the relationship building skills that support listening to your stakeholders, communicating effectively with business partners, innovating, and thinking strategically about how to approach challenges. So the skills are shifting, but there is still a distinct need for the people. As technology frees up time, we need employees who are able to engage in communication and active listening, among the most needed skills. They have to be able to discern the needs of their stakeholders and their business partners, maintain positive relationships, and succinctly and clearly convey expectations to your suppliers and to other service providers. There's a saying that we all have two ears and one mouth, so we can listen and observe more than we speak with our suppliers and with other stakeholders, so that we can get a better understanding of what they're truly able to do and what expertise they can bring. Creativity and innovation are also on the most important skill list because of the shifting nature of the modern supply chain. Today, our supply chains are forced to address previously unheard of situations and disruptions. We already mentioned the global pandemic. We need our professionals to be able to identify novel solutions to keep the business running. And we think back to last year, we saw alcohol companies switching over to hand sanitizers, car makers doing ventilators. People were bringing creative solutions to novel problems. And frankly, we need to do that again. We need to deal with congested ports, delays, shortages, blockages. It's time that we got creative and figuring out some solutions to these problems. Because the one thing we want to avoid is the old definition of insanity, of doing the same thing over and over and hoping for a different result. We need to try new things. We need innovation and creativity. We need to think strategically to solve these complex problems. And AI can bring the data to us to help us with predicting shifts that are necessary, whether it's for our manufacturing operations or planning. But employees need to be able to then make the decisions based on that information. We need supply chain professionals who can look at the evidence and make the decision, especially when there's not really one right answer, or we don't know what the right answer is. And a question has come up before about how do you teach these skills? If these are really softer skills and not typically part of a college curriculum, for example, how do we get our employees engaged in developing their skill set here? One of the best ways is on-the-job learning, dealing with real-world scenarios, real-world case studies, and active mentoring. And despite the overwhelming need for strategic and relationship building skills, we still need employees with more technical skill sets like data science and analysis, because these skills will help with adopting, maintaining, and supporting AI in the supply chain in the long run. We need employees to be able to extract the insights from the new technology and the new systems and interpret these results, because ultimately we really need to leverage the data we already have. Most organizations today have more data than they can handle. So we don't need to collect even more. We need to leverage what we have. One organization I spoke with, they were very excited about building a great control tower for their supply chain. But what they forgot to do was assign accountability for actually using the data that came out of this. So it's important to continue to consider that the people are equally important or more so than the technology. We need agility and flexibility in our employees to adapt to change, because that's about the only thing we can guarantee will happen in the future. Change, more change. Who knows what it's going to be? We've been on a wild ride for 2020 and 2021, and more to come, I'm sure. So in making sure that we've got employees who can roll with the changes is critical. And just a quick comment that we see that the majority of the skill changes that have been needed for employees in supply chain in the recent past is due to AI and technology. That's the biggest, fastest area that is changing. So when we talk about investing in our employees, it's critical to understand that we can't expect employees to make these shifts on their own. And as the skills continue to change, the good news is we see companies are investing in time for training and development to help employees with this shift. And it's reassuring that they're not being left to fend for themselves when it comes to new skills and capabilities that are needed. And we did see that this support for upskilling and reskilling crosses industries. without differ. At the median, organizations are investing in 7 days of employee learning per employee to ease this transition. And more than half of the respondents, 55%, told us that they feel that AI is actually helping to shorten the number of days needed for learning. Think back to some of those use cases for AI. Those can actually impact how training is delivered. And then we've got the learning budget. So time is money, and organizations are also adjusting their learning budgets to ensure that employees get the skills development they need. And what we see in our research is that AI represents about 30% of the change in learning budgets at the median. So organizations are budgeting for the costs that go with upskilling and reskilling their supply chain employees. And at the median, they're investing $148 per employee to help them learn new skills. Now, before you jump on me in the comments and say, that's it, 150 bucks, that's nothing. While that number may sound low, the good news is that we have found that much of this budget actually sits in HR, in your human resources or your people and culture departments, versus in supply chain. And this is a best practice we've seen in our research. Supply chain partnering with HR, where supply chain can say, hey, here are the skills we need. These are the capabilities we need for our employees to have for the future. And HR's expertise is in developing those employees, in training and mentoring and setting up those kinds of programs so that employees can get the skills that are needed. And we saw that almost 2/3 of respondents think that AI is helping to decrease the amount needed to budget for learning. So looking forward, the impact of AI on the supply chain is only going to increase in coming years. With 40% of organizations currently considering or evaluating the use of AI for supply chain, there's a good chance that your company will be adopting it soon if it has not done so already. And the key to retaining employees who will thrive in future supply chain roles is to ensure that they have the right mix of skills to support this technology and leverage it strategically. And the good news is that many organizations have already committed both budget and time to provide learning opportunities for supply chain professionals to develop or enhance these critical skills. And although AI does not deliver the reduction in headcount that some companies believed would come with it, retraining can actually help prevent skills shortages in other parts of the supply chain and is a smarter investment than trying to hire all new employees with the necessary skills. APQC encourages organizations to consider employee learning as part of the business case for investing in AI. And I have provided some additional information for those who'd like some demographics on the participants in our research. And also to learn more, we have additional resources in APQC's resource library. We have some articles, we have a summary of the data that was collected, as well as some infographics on the skills needed to go along with AI. You're always welcome to contact me for more information or to discuss further. And if your organization has a story about your use of AI, I would love to hear it. And don't forget to connect with APQC as well across all of our social platforms. And thank you so much for your time today. And just, I see we do have one question that came in about how is AI making training time and cost lower? So if we think back to the use of Google Glass or Glass Enterprise, where employees are actually able to have a heads-up display that they're looking at overlaid over what's in front of them. And we do have a case study on AGCO, one of the companies that is using it, for employees who it has dramatically shortened the time to competency because the work instructions they need to do the work are literally right there where they're looking in front of them. So it's helping to speed that up by, instead of having employees go sit in a training class and then go try and apply that, it's all applied together right there through this augmented reality. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today on this webinar. And please continue to come to APQC with all your questions. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.